For 5.4, the two things that you need to put at the top of your paper that you need to know is what some values are. We're studying imaginary numbers, and remember, imaginary numbers are like square root and negative numbers. We can actually work with that, even though in the past you've been told you can't take the square root of a negative number. You really can. And so what that looks like, you need to know that when you see the number I, it is equal to the square root of negative 1. Okay, so anytime they're wanting you to mess around with this and provide a value, that's the value of I. And a lot of times what they want you to do is you might get something that says the square root of negative 25 and they're asking you to simplify it. So what you do is you think this way. Isn't 25 negative 1 times 25, right? Negative 25 is equal to negative 1 times 25, correct? All right, so I don't know if y'all remember this about radicals, but if you're multiplying things under radicals, you can split them up and they can each get their own radical. So I could split them up and say the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 25 is equal to the square root of negative 25. Well, what's the square root of negative 1 up here? What did we just write on our paper? What's it equal to? I, right? So I'm going to replace that square root of negative 1 with an I, and then the square root of 25 is 5. And just like if we had x times 5 on our paper, wouldn't we write it as 5x? Likewise, we would write this as 5I. Okay, another thing you need to write on your paper, and honestly, I told the pre-cal kids to write it at the top of their quiz and write it at the top of their test when they took it because it just gets a little confusing. Here's the other fact. It is I squared is equal to negative 1. Let's see why that's true. If I have I is equal to square root of negative 1 and I square both sides, here's my I squared, right? That's where that came from. But if you take the square root of something squared, don't you get what's inside the square root? Right? If I had the square root of x squared, it would be x. Well, the square root of negative 1 squared is negative 1. This is another fact you're going to need to know because you're going to get some things that you're going to need to simplify, and we'll see some problems like that in a minute. So these two things you got to know. Whether you memorize them, I mean, you know what I do is I memorize I equals square root of negative 1, and then I think, okay, what if I squared each side? Doesn't that give me the next one I need to know there? I squared is negative 1. So I focus on remembering this one right here, the top one, and then I square both sides to get that second piece of information. And again, in order to do that, you have to think the square root of something squared is just that thing back. Because let me show you what people do that messes them up. What if I had I squared is the square root of negative 1 squared? And I said, oh, that's 2 copies of the square root of negative 1. Okay, well let me put it under one radical. What's negative 1 times negative 1? Oh, it's 1. So this I squared is square root of 1, I is 1. No, that's not how you do it. It doesn't work that way with imaginary numbers. You got to be careful because that's going to mess you up. And if you ask the pre-cal kids, they got messed up on this already on a quiz. No.